The radio crackled with static as the emergency frequency lit up across 3 time zones. Mayday, Mayday, this is Bravo 77. We have wounded, repeat, we have wounded. The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, pinned down with his 8-man reconnaissance team in a valley that didn't exist on any official map. The coordinates he transmitted placed them in what military planners called a geographical impossibility, a basin surrounded by 1,000-foot granite walls, accessible only by a dirt strip barely wide enough for a motorcycle. At Bagram Air Base, the Tactical Operations Center erupted in controlled chaos. General Harrison Blackwood, a man whose chest bore 30 years of ribbons, studied the satellite imagery with growing frustration. The valley appeared as a brown scar against Afghanistan's eastern mountains, its single airstrip measuring exactly 1,200 feet of packed earth. Standard protocol demanded a minimum 2,500-foot runway for any military aircraft evacuation. "Sir, we've got fast movers inbound, but they can't land," reported Major Reynolds, sweat beading despite the air conditioning. "The closest LZ is 40 clicks through hostile territory. The team won't survive that long." Blackwood's jaw tightened. Webb's transmission had mentioned Taliban forces massing on the ridgelines. Time was bleeding away like hydraulic fluid from a severed line. The general's eyes swept across the roster of available aircraft. F-16s too fast, helicopters too vulnerable to the reported anti-aircraft positions, and C-130s requiring runways longer than some European countries. Then a voice cut through the chatter, calm as morning coffee. "Bagram Tower, this is Reaper 2-1, requesting permission to attempt extraction." The transmission carried an unusual quality, not the typical bravado of fighter jocks or the mechanical precision of transport pilots, but something different, measured, deliberate. "Negative, Reaper 2-1. Stand by for alternate instructions," the tower responded automatically. But Lieutenant Colonel Elena Frost Kozlov was already banking her. Thunderbolt II toward the coordinates. She'd been flying combat missions when most of these controllers were still learning multiplication tables. The Warthog beneath her represented 25 years of close air support missions, each flight hour etched into her memory like scars on titanium. "Tower, Reaper 2-1. I'm declaring piloting command authority under emergency protocols. Those Marines aren't coming home in body bags on my watch." General Blackwood grabbed the radio himself. "Reaper 2-1, this is actual. You cannot land a fixed-wing aircraft in that valley. It's mathematically impossible." Elena's response would become legend in Air Force circles, though few would believe it at first. "Sir, with respect, mathematics never shot down a Taliban stronghold. I'll be on the ground in 12 minutes." The valley waited below, its secrets hidden in shadow and dust, while somewhere in the mountains, 8 American soldiers counted their remaining ammunition and wondered if anyone was crazy enough to attempt the impossible. Elena Kozlov had been answering impossible questions her entire career. Born in Detroit to a Ukrainian father who'd fled Soviet oppression and a Mexican mother who cleaned office buildings at night, she'd learned early that respect wasn't given, it was taken, one impossible mission at a time. Her call sign, Frost, had nothing to do with cold weather and everything to do with her ability to remain calm when everyone else was melting down. The A-10 Thunderbolt II she piloted was an anachronism, a flying tank built around a 30mm cannon that could destroy Soviet armor. While other pilots dreamed of sleek F-22s and supersonic glory, Elena found poetry in the Warthog's brutal honesty. It flew low, slow, and ugly, designed for one purpose: keeping ground troops alive when everything else failed. Her aircraft today bore the scars of 847 combat hours across 3 deployments. Bullet holes had been patched, hydraulic lines replaced, and engines swapped more times than she cared to count. The maintenance chief, Senior Master Sergeant Rodriguez, treated the machine like his own daughter, often working 18-hour shifts to keep it mission-ready. Frost, this is Hammer 7, came Webb's voice, weaker now. We've got movement on the ridge lines. Estimate company strength Taliban moving to overwatch positions. Small arms and probable RPGs. Elena's response was clinical. Copy Hammer 7, I see your position. Stay low and mark your perimeter with smoke when I make my approach. How many wounded? 3 KIA, 4 WIA, 1 critical. We need immediate evac or we're all coming home horizontal. The mathematics were indeed brutal. Her A-10 weighed 29,000 pounds empty, and the physics of short-field landings demanded perfection. Too fast, and she'd overshoot into the granite wall. Too slow, and she'd stall, turning herself and the wounded into a smoking crater. The margin for error measured in inches and milliseconds. Below, the valley revealed its secrets as she descended. The dirt strip ran east-west, with a slight upslope that might help with deceleration. Afghan winds typically flowed down valley in the afternoon, potentially providing a helpful headwind. But the approaches were nightmarish. Steep walls channeling turbulent air, invisible downdrafts, and nowhere to go if the landing went wrong. Elena began her calculations aloud, her voice steady as a metronome. Reaper 2-1 beginning approach checklist. Gear down, flaps full, power at minimum approach speed. Estimated touchdown in 90 seconds. General Blackwood's voice crackled through the static. Reaper 2-1, abort this approach. That's a direct order. Elena's response came after a pause that seemed to last forever. Sir, I understand the order, but sometimes generals have to trust lieutenants to do lieutenant things. Breaking contact with tower. See you on the ground. She switched off her radio and dove toward destiny, carrying with her the hopes of 8 American soldiers and the weight of a career spent proving doubters wrong. The A-10's engine spooled down as Elena committed to the approach, her airspeed dropping toward the minimum controllable speed. Through her canopy, the valley walls rose like cathedral spires, their shadows painting geometric patterns across the narrow landing strip. She could see muzzle flashes now, tiny sparks of light, where Taliban fighters were positioning themselves for what they assumed would be target practice. Her hands moved across the controls with surgical precision, each adjustment calculated to extract maximum performance from an aircraft never designed for this mission. The Thunderbolt's titanium bathtub cockpit had protected countless pilots from ground fire, but it couldn't protect her from the laws of physics she was about to challenge. Come on, beautiful, she whispered to the machine, feeling the slight buffet that indicated approaching stall speed. The runway rushed up to meet her, a ribbon of packed earth that seemed impossibly narrow and short. Her main gear kissed the ground with a puff of dust, followed immediately by the nose wheel. Then began the most crucial 15 seconds of her career. Maximum braking, thrust reversers deployed, every system strained to its limit. The granite wall at the end of the runway grew larger with each heartbeat. Dust clouds billowed around the cockpit as the Warthog fought to stop, its tires smoking against the primitive surface. Elena felt the aircraft settling as speed bled away, 80 knots, 60, 40, 20, until finally, impossibly, the A-10 rolled to a stop with less than 50 feet of runway remaining. She had just accomplished something that would be debated in engineering circles for decades, landing a combat aircraft in a space smaller than most municipal airports. But there was no time for celebration. Already, she could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire echoing off the valley walls. Webb's team was in contact, and she had perhaps 10 minutes before the Taliban organized a coordinated assault on her position. Elena popped the canopy and vaulted to the ground, her flight boots hitting Afghan soil with a solid thump. The 8 soldiers emerged from concealment, moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals who knew death was stalking them. The wounded were carried first, pale faces streaked with dust and blood, but alive. "Ma'am," Webb said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and disbelief, "that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Alina was already conducting her pre-flight inspection, checking for damage from the landing. "Save the compliments, Sergeant. We're not airborne yet." The real challenge lay ahead. Taking off from the abbreviated runway, overloaded with passengers under enemy fire, would require every ounce of skill she possessed, and perhaps a small miracle besides. Loading 9 additional souls into an aircraft designed for one pilot pushed the A-10 beyond all operational parameters. Alina had removed the aircraft's 30 ammunition to save weight, but even empty, the Thunderbolt now carried nearly 35,000 pounds, well beyond maximum gross weight for the abbreviated runway. The wounded lay on stretchers jury-rigged into the cargo compartment, while the walking wounded squeezed into every available space. Webb positioned himself behind Alina's ejection seat, his M4 rifle ready to provide suppressing fire through the open canopy if needed. "Frost, we've got movement on both ridge lines," he reported, peering through binoculars. "Looks like they're setting up for enfilading fire down the runway. Soon as we start rolling, we're gonna be in a shooting gallery." Alina's mind raced through the calculations. Overweight takeoff meant extended ground roll, more time exposed to enemy fire, and a shallower climb angle once airborne. The valley walls would funnel them into a predictable flight path, perfect for the RPG teams she could see moving into position. "Listen up," she announced to her passengers. "This takeoff's going to be different. We'll be heavy, slow, and under fire. Keep your heads down, don't touch anything, and if you see the ground getting close, that's normal for about the first 2 minutes." She advanced the throttles to military power, feeling the twin General Electric TF-34 engines spool up to maximum thrust. The A-10 began to move, painfully slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Dust clouds obscured her vision as the primitive runway surface disintegrated under the jet blast. At 60 knots, the first bullets began impacting around the aircraft. Alina could hear the distinctive metallic pings of small arms fire striking the titanium armor. At 80 knots, an RPG detonated off the left wingtip, the explosion rocking the overloaded aircraft. Stay on it," Webb muttered, his knuckles white as he gripped his rifle. Alina pulled the stick back gently, coaxing the Thunderbolt into the air at well below normal rotation speed. The aircraft wallowed into flight, its wings struggling to generate lift in the thin mountain air. Ahead loomed the granite wall where so many had expected her to crash on landing. With 15 feet to spare, the A-10 cleared the ridgeline and began its laborious climb toward safety. Behind them, the valley erupted in frustrated gunfire as Taliban fighters realized their prey had escaped. But Alina knew they weren't safe yet. The overloaded aircraft climbed at barely 200 feet per minute, and ahead lay 30 miles of hostile territory before reaching the relative safety of coalition airspace. The journey home became a masterclass in tactical aviation under impossible conditions. Alina nursed the struggling A-10 through mountain passes that seemed designed to swallow aircraft whole, the overloaded machine responding sluggishly to every control input. Each ridge line might hide surface-to-air missiles. Each valley could funnel them into an ambush. Webb had established communications with a pair of F-16 fighters providing top cover, their supersonic jets circling high above like protective eagles. "Reaper 2-1, this is Viper flight. We have you visual. Recommend immediate climb to 8,000 feet to clear known SAM envelope." Alina's response carried the weight of hard experience. "Negative, Viper flight. This bird won't climb above 4,000 in current configuration. We'll stay in the weeds and use terrain masking." It was a calculated gamble. Flying low made them vulnerable to small arms and man-portable air defense systems, but also kept them below the engagement envelope of more sophisticated threats. Alina threaded the A-10 through valleys she'd memorized during countless previous missions, using her intimate knowledge of the terrain to avoid predictable flight paths. 20 minutes into the flight, one of the wounded soldiers went into shock. Alina could hear Webb working frantically in the back, his medic training the only thing standing between life and death. The nearest field hospital was still 15 minutes away at their current speed. "How much faster can this thing go?" Webb asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Alina was already pushing the engines beyond recommended limits, the exhaust gas temperature gauges redlined. "She's giving us everything she's got, Sergeant. Talk to your man, keep him conscious." The radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "Reaper 2-1, this is Bagram Actual." General Blackwood's voice had lost its earlier authority, replaced by something approaching reverence. "Be advised, emergency medical is standing by on runway 3. You have priority handling and emergency vehicles positioned." Alina keyed her microphone. "Copy, Bagram Actual. Inbound with 9 souls, multiple urgent surgical. Estimate 10 minutes to touchdown." What she didn't know was that her radio transmission was being monitored across multiple command levels, from company commanders to Pentagon officials. Word of the impossible rescue was spreading through military channels like wildfire, carried by the kind of battlefield legend that transforms ordinary people into icons. As the A-10 limped toward Bagram, its engine straining and its structure creaking under the abnormal loads, Alina Kozlov was writing herself into aviation history 1 mile at a time. The runway at Bagram Air Base stretched before them like a welcome mat after 30 minutes of flying through hostile airspace. Alina could see the emergency vehicles positioned along the runway, ambulances, fire trucks, and crash rescue teams prepared for whatever condition her aircraft might be in after the unprecedented mission. The A-10 touched down hard, its overstressed landing gear groaning under the excessive weight. As the aircraft rolled out, Alina could see General Blackwood standing beside the runway, his weathered face unreadable behind military-issued sunglasses. She had expected a court-martial. Instead, she found herself looking at a man whose entire understanding of tactical aviation had just been redefined. Medical personnel swarmed the aircraft before the engines had fully spooled down. Stretchers materialized as if by magic, and within minutes, the wounded were being loaded into ambulances for the short trip to the base hospital. Alina remained in the cockpit, running through her post-flight checklist with mechanical precision while her mind processed what had just occurred. Webb was the last to leave the aircraft. Before departing, he paused beside Alina's canopy and rendered a crisp salute. "Ma'am, I don't know what they're gonna write in the history books about this, but I want you to know you saved 8 American lives today with nothing but skill and guts." Alina returned the salute, then began the process of shutting down her aircraft. Each switch position, every gauge reading was committed to memory for the inevitable debriefing. She had just completed a mission that violated every safety protocol, exceeded every operational limit, and succeeded against mathematical certainty. General Blackwood approached as she climbed down from the cockpit. For a moment, the 2 officers stood facing each other in the Afghan heat, separated by rank, gender, and 30 years of military experience, but united by what had just transpired in that nameless valley. "Lieutenant Colonel," the general began, his voice carefully measured, "that was either the most brilliant piece of flying I've witnessed in 3 decades, or the most reckless disregard for orders in Air Force history." Alina met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I suspect it was both." Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes, respect, perhaps, or recognition. "The preliminary after-action report is going to be interesting reading. I've never had to explain how one of my pilots accomplished the impossible while simultaneously disobeying direct orders. Sir, if I may, sometimes the mission requires us to choose between following orders and bringing soldiers home. I chose soldiers." The general nodded slowly. "That choice, Lieutenant Colonel, is exactly why you're about to become the most famous A-10 pilot in Air Force history. As Alina walked toward the debriefing facility, she had no idea that her radio transmissions had been recorded, her flight path tracked by satellite, and her mission already being analyzed by tactical experts worldwide. The woman they called Frost was about to discover that legends, once born, take on lives of their own. The debriefing room at Bagram was standing room only, an unprecedented gathering of military brass that included representatives from Air Combat Command, Special Operations Command, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff via secure video link. Alina sat at the head of a polished conference table, still wearing her flight suit, facing questions that would normally be asked during accident investigations. Colonel Sarah Martinez, the base operations commander, led the inquiry with the methodical precision of someone building either a case for court-martial or a nomination for the Medal of Honor. Lieutenant Colonel Kozlov, your aircraft exceeded maximum gross weight by approximately 6,000 pounds. You landed on an unimproved surface 1,500 feet shorter than minimum requirements. You took off under direct enemy fire while overloaded. Please explain your decision-making process. Alina's response was clinical, devoid of the emotion that had driven her actions. Ma'am, the tactical situation required immediate extraction of personnel under fire. No other aircraft type could access the landing zone. Standard evacuation procedures would have resulted in 100% casualties. I assess the risks as acceptable given the alternative. General Blackwood leaned forward in his chair. Acceptable risks. Lieutenant Colonel, you attempted something that our best engineers say was impossible. The physics don't support what you accomplished. Sir, with respect, physics is what happens when you don't have enough thrust or skill to overcome it. The A-10 is capable of more than most people realize, especially when lives depend on it. The room fell silent as Alina's words sank in. Here was an officer who had just redefined the operational envelope of an entire aircraft type, yet spoke about it with the casual confidence of someone discussing routine training flights. Major General Patricia Wells, participating via video link from the Pentagon, posed the question everyone was thinking. Colonel Kozlov, what you've accomplished today will likely become required study at the Air Force Academy and Test Pilot School. My question is simple. Could you do it again? Alina considered her answer carefully. She thought about the split-second calculations, the feel of the aircraft at the edge of controllability, the variables that had aligned to make the impossible merely improbable. Ma'am, under identical conditions, with the same aircraft, same weather, same urgency. Yes, but I wouldn't recommend making it standard operating procedure. A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the room. Here was an officer who had just accomplished something unprecedented, yet retained enough humility to acknowledge that miracles shouldn't become doctrine. Colonel Martinez closed her folder. Lieutenant Colonel, you're hereby relieved of duty pending investigation of this incident. You'll remain on base until further notice. Alina nodded, having expected this outcome. What she hadn't expected was General Blackwood's next statement. You're also being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross and immediate promotion consideration. Sometimes, Lieutenant Colonel, breaking rules and making history look remarkably similar. Alina stood in her quarters that evening, staring out at the Afghan sunset while trying to process the day's events. Her A-10 sat on the flight line, surrounded by maintenance crews who were documenting every rivet, every stress mark, every indication of what the aircraft had endured during its impossible mission. Senior Master Sergeant Rodriguez knocked on her door, his weathered face bearing the expression of a man who had spent 30 years keeping aircraft airworthy. Ma'am, I've been crawling over your bird for the past 6 hours. Want to know what I found? Alina gestured for him to continue. Structurally, she's sound. Landing gear shows stress but within acceptable limits. Engine temps ran hot but no permanent damage. Hydraulics are nominal. That machine took everything you asked of it and came back asking for more. Rodriguez paused, studying Alina with the eye of someone who had watched countless pilots come and go. Ma'am, in 30 years of turning wrenches, I've never seen an aircraft pushed so far beyond its limits and survive without significant damage. That wasn't just good flying. That was a conversation between pilot and machine that most people never experience. She's a good bird, Chief, always has been. No, ma'am, with respect. She's a good bird because she knows she's got a pilot who understands what she's capable of. That's the difference between aviation and flying. Rodriguez headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and ma'am, the boys down at the flight line are already calling your A-10 miracle worker. Thought you should know. Alone again, Alina picked up the letter she'd begun writing to her father in Detroit. How do you explain to a man who fled communist oppression that his daughter had just redefined what was possible in the name of bringing American soldiers home? How do you describe the weight of 9 lives trusting your judgment when mathematics said they were all going to die? The letter remained unfinished as Alina fell asleep. The sound of C-130s landing and departing, providing the constant background rhythm of a war that had consumed 13 years of American involvement and showed no signs of ending. But in one small valley, on one impossible afternoon, the war had paused long enough for skill, courage, and an old warthog to rewrite the rules of what heroes looked like. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new challenges, and the beginning of a legend that would outlive the war itself. But tonight, 8 American soldiers were alive because someone had been willing to prove that impossible was just another word for difficult. Word of the impossible rescue spread through military social networks and unofficial channels long before any official reports were filed. Combat camera footage of Alina's landing, recorded by a drone that had been providing overwatch for Webb's team, began circulating among military personnel worldwide within hours of the mission. The video was grainy, shot from high altitude, but it clearly showed an A-10 Thunderbolt II touching down on a dirt strip that appeared impossibly short for fixed-wing aircraft operations. More dramatically, it captured the takeoff under fire, showing the overloaded aircraft struggling into the air while muzzle flashes sparked from surrounding ridge lines. At Nellis Air Force Base, home of the Air Force's weapons school, instructors gathered in crowded conference rooms to analyze Alina's flight path, her approach profile, and the tactical decisions that had made the rescue possible. Captain Michael Harrison, a weapons school graduate and A-10 instructor pilot, summarized the prevailing sentiment. This isn't just exceptional flying. This is someone who understands her aircraft at a level we don't typically see outside of test pilots. The attention wasn't limited to American military circles. NATO allies, facing similar challenges in Afghanistan's unforgiving terrain, began requesting technical briefings on short-field landing techniques. The British Royal Air Force, operating Harrier jump jets capable of vertical landing, found themselves studying an American pilot who had accomplished with conventional aircraft what they thought required specialized VTOL capabilities. But it was the reaction from Alina's squadron mates that revealed the true measure of what she had accomplished. The 354th Fighter Squadron, nicknamed the Bulldogs, had flown thousands of close air support missions without losing a single soldier under their protection. Alina's rescue had maintained that perfect record under circumstances that should have resulted in wholesale casualties. Lieutenant Colonel James "Brick" Morrison, the squadron commander, called a meeting 3 days after the mission. "People are calling what Frost did miraculous," he told the assembled pilots. "I'm here to tell you it wasn't a miracle. It was the logical result of 2,500 hours of A-10 combat time, combined with someone who never accepted that impossible was an answer." The squadron's newest pilot, Captain Lisa Chen, raised her hand. "Sir, how do we train for something like this? The landing parameters she used aren't in any manual." Morrison's answer would become part of squadron lore. "You don't train for the impossible, Captain. You train so thoroughly for the possible that when the impossible shows up, you're ready to have a conversation with it. Alina, meanwhile, found herself confined to base but hardly isolated. Senior officers from across the coalition sought her input on tactical aviation challenges. Her phone rang constantly with requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and consulting opportunities that would begin once her military service ended. She declined them all, focusing instead on the detailed technical report that would eventually become required reading at the Air Force Academy. The official investigation concluded after 2 weeks of testimony, technical analysis, and review of Alina's service record. The findings, classified initially but later released in redacted form, painted a picture of an officer whose entire career had been preparation for one impossible afternoon in Afghanistan. Colonel Martinez delivered the results personally, arriving at Alina's quarters with a folder that would determine whether she faced court-martial or commendation. Lieutenant Colonel, the investigation board has reached its conclusions. You violated direct orders from a general officer, exceeded aircraft limitations, and operated outside established safety protocols. Alina remained at attention, prepared for the consequences of her decisions. You also saved 8 American lives, demonstrated tactical innovation under extreme conditions, and proved that the A-10 Thunderbolt II is capable of missions previously thought impossible. The board recommends you for the Distinguished Flying Cross, immediate promotion to full colonel, and assignment as an instructor at the weapons school. Alina's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "Ma'am, thank you, but I have to ask, what about General Blackwood's direct orders?" Martinez smiled for the first time since Alina had known her. General Blackwood personally endorsed the board's recommendations. His exact words were, "Sometimes you need a lieutenant colonel who's willing to prove a general wrong. Colonel Kozlov did that and brought our people home. That's what we need more of, not less." The promotion ceremony took place 6 weeks later on the same runway where Alina's A-10 had returned from its impossible mission. General Blackwood himself pinned the eagles on her shoulders, while Webb and his team stood in formation nearby, living testimony to what happened when skill met desperation and found a way to win. Alina's father, who had flown from Detroit for the ceremony, watched with tears in his eyes as his daughter received recognition for embodying the American dream he had sought when fleeing Soviet oppression decades earlier. Her mother, unable to travel due to health issues, watched via video link from her hospital bed, her pride evident despite the distance. In her acceptance speech, Alina kept her remarks brief. "This medal doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every maintainer who kept old warthogs flying, every controller who talked pilots through bad weather, every soldier who trusted that when they called for help, someone would answer. Today we proved that impossible is just another tactical problem waiting for the right solution." The ceremony concluded with a flyover of 4 A-10 Thunderbolt IIs, their formation tight and precise as they roared overhead at 500 feet. Alina looked up at the aircraft she had spent her career mastering and realized that her story was far from over. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that the only limits that mattered were the ones you accepted. But today, she was simply a pilot who had kept faith with the soldiers who depended on her, and that was enough. Colonel Alina Kozlov's first day as a weapons school instructor arrived with the typical Nevada heat and the nervous energy of 24 carefully selected pilots who had come to learn advanced tactics from someone who had redefined what advanced meant. The weapons school, known throughout the Air Force as the ultimate graduate-level tactical education, had modified its curriculum to include case studies of short-field operations under combat conditions. Alina stood before the assembled class, her new eagles glinting in the fluorescent lighting of the briefing room. These were not typical students. Each had been hand-picked from operational squadrons. Each had combat experience, and each thought they understood the capabilities of their aircraft until they arrived at Nellie's. "Gentlemen and ladies," Alina began, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had been tested under fire. "You're here because someone in your chain of command thinks you have potential to become tactical experts. Over the next 6 months, we're going to find out if they were right." She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, satellite imagery of an unnamed valley in Afghanistan. "This is where we begin, not with theory, not with textbook solutions, but with a problem that shouldn't have had an answer. By the time we're finished here, you'll understand that every limitation you think your aircraft has is really just a limitation in your understanding of what's possible." Major Sarah Kim, a pilot with 3 deployments under her belt, raised her hand. "Ma'am, we've all seen the video of your rescue mission. How do we learn to make those kinds of calculations under pressure?" Alina's answer revealed the teaching philosophy that would influence tactical doctrine for the next generation. "Major, you don't learn to make impossible calculations under pressure. You learn to make precise calculations under normal conditions until precision becomes instinctive. When pressure arrives, instinct takes over and makes precision look like magic." The months that followed transformed both instructor and students. Alina discovered that teaching tactical aviation required breaking down her intuitive decisions into systematic processes that could be learned, practiced, and mastered by others. Her students, meanwhile, found themselves pushed beyond their comfort zones in ways that made their previous combat experience seem like basic flight training. Captain Rodriguez, a young pilot on his first weapons school assignment, summarized the experience during his graduation speech. "Before I came here, I thought I was a good A-10 pilot. Colonel Kozlov didn't teach me to be better. She taught me to understand what good actually meant." Alina's influence extended beyond the classroom. Her technical reports on short-field operations became required reading throughout NATO air forces. Her analysis of tactical decision-making under extreme conditions was incorporated into survival school curricula. Most significantly, her approach to pushing aircraft beyond published limitations, safely and scientifically, began changing how the Air Force approached operational testing. But it was her work with female pilots that may have had the most lasting impact. Alina's success had opened doors for women in tactical aviation, and she used her position to mentor the next generation of female combat pilots. Her office became an unofficial gathering place where career advice, technical discussions, and strategic planning sessions shaped the future of women in military aviation. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, one of Alina's mentees, would later write, "Colonel Kozlov never talked about being a woman in a man's profession. She simply demonstrated what excellence looked like and expected the same from everyone around her. That was more powerful than any speech about breaking barriers." As Alina's reputation grew, so did requests for her expertise from unexpected quarters. Hollywood producers wanted her to consult on military aviation films. Defense contractors sought her input on next-generation aircraft design. Foreign military services offered lucrative consulting contracts. She declined them all, finding purpose in the daily work of transforming good pilots into exceptional tactical aviators. Each class brought new challenges, new perspectives, and new opportunities to refine the art of teaching advanced flying to people who thought they already knew how to fly. The true measure of Alina's impact became evident 3 years after her assignment to the weapons school, when former students began returning from deployments with stories of their own impossible missions. They had taken the lessons learned in Nevada classrooms and applied them in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, saving lives and completing missions that previous generations of pilots might have deemed impossible. But Alina's greatest satisfaction came from a different source: the knowledge that somewhere in the world, American soldiers were coming home alive because someone had been taught to look at limitations as opportunities for innovation. That, she realized, was the true legacy of her impossible afternoon in an unnamed Afghan valley, not the medal on her chest, but the multiplication of possibility through teaching others to see beyond the word impossible. The phone call that would change Alina's life again came on a Tuesday morning in her 4th year at the weapons school. General Patricia Wells, now Air Combat Command's commander, was on the line with an opportunity that would take Alina from classroom instruction to shaping the future of American tactical aviation. Alina, I need you in Washington. The Pentagon is standing up a new office, Advanced Tactical Development, and I want you to lead it. Your job will be to take lessons learned from operations like your Afghanistan rescue and figure out how to make the impossible routine. The offer represented everything Alina had never known she wanted. The chance to influence military aviation at the strategic level, to work with the brightest minds in aerospace engineering, and to ensure that future generations of pilots would have better tools and techniques for bringing American forces home safely. But accepting meant leaving the classroom, leaving the direct mentorship that had become central to her identity as an officer. It meant trading the immediate satisfaction of watching students master complex skills for the long-term uncertainty of bureaucratic innovation. Alina's decision surprised many who knew her. General, I appreciate the offer, but I belong in the cockpit and the classroom. There are 24 new students arriving next month who need to learn that their aircraft are capable of more than they imagine. That's where I can make the biggest difference. Wells' response revealed the strategic thinking that had made her one of the Air Force's most effective leaders. Alina, what you accomplished in Afghanistan was extraordinary. What you've done at the weapons school has been exceptional. But what you could accomplish in Washington might be revolutionary. We need someone who understands both the art and science of advanced tactics to guide the next evolution of American air power. The conversation continued for an hour, covering everything from Alina's long-term career goals to her vision for the future of close air support aviation. By the end, Alina had agreed to consider the position, but only if she could spend half her time continuing to teach at Nellie's. Sold, Wells responded immediately. You can commute between Washington and Nevada. We need that connection to operational reality, and frankly, Alina, you've earned the right to write your own job description. The compromise solution reflected Alina's understanding that influence could be multiplied through institutional change. As Advanced Tactical Development's director, she would oversee research into everything from pilot training methodologies to aircraft modification programs. Her small team would include test pilots, engineers, behavioral scientists, and operational planners, all focused on finding systematic ways to expand the envelope of what American military aviation could accomplish. The office's first major project involved analyzing Alina's Afghanistan rescue in exhaustive detail, using computer modeling, wind tunnel testing, and flight simulation to understand exactly how she had accomplished what should have been impossible. The goal was not to replicate the specific mission, but to identify principles that could be applied to other seemingly impossible scenarios. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the team's lead aerospace engineer, summarized their findings in a presentation that would influence military aviation for decades. Colonel Kozlov's mission succeeded because she understood her aircraft's capabilities better than the engineers who designed it. She had internalized performance data, aerodynamic principles, and structural limitations to the point where she could perform real-time calculations that our computers needed minutes to complete. The question is, how do we give that level of understanding to other pilots? The answer involved revolutionary changes to pilot training, incorporating virtual reality simulation, advanced flight testing, and psychological preparation techniques borrowed from Olympic athletes and emergency medical personnel. Alina's program began producing pilots who thought differently about aircraft limitations, who saw challenges where others saw impossibilities. But the program's most significant impact may have been cultural. Alina insisted that every research project include operational pilots as full partners, not just test subjects. This collaborative approach between academia and operational experience created solutions that were both theoretically sound and practically applicable. Within 2 years, advanced tactical development methodologies were being adopted by military aviation programs worldwide. Alina found herself briefing NATO commanders, consulting with Israeli Air Force tactical units,